So this video continues on with the decision to go to war. So one of the interesting things as far as return to international relations perspective or realism is the scholars from that perspective question whether Iraq was really the right war. Because they said, well, could Saddam really be contained? And they further warned of destabilizing the Middle East. So if you think about realism, struggle for power, and sort of the focus on your own interest, they warned about intervention there, how that could have possible consequences for the United States in the long run. So we also saw in this period that the Bush administration, again, a lot of folks were critical about at that time, was there was this sense of equating patriotism with support for the policies and therefore the kind of troops. So, there was a sense that if you weren't for their policies, so for example, intervention in Iraq, that you were therefore kind of against the United States or against the troops, against the military, that kind of thing. So it caused a lot of sort of domestic tension in the country in the post 9/11 period, as far as again, a lot of folks that were sort of against the war, those type of things, or found it difficult at times. All right, so this is another quote from your book, from another author Hegel. It says, many of those who want to rush this country into war and think that it would be so quick and easy don't know anything about war. So there was this sort of sense, I think Hegel puts right there, that maybe removing from Saddam Hussein from power, that part might have been easy, but as far as what would happen next, maybe not so much. Again, a lot of folks in the Bush administration thought the United States would be welcomed as sort of liberators, bringing democracy to them, bringing democracy to Iraq and perhaps the greater Middle East. But of course, that was not the case. All right. So this is just kind of another quote about, kind of coming at it, how they perceive war might be different from those that maybe, had actually been in a combat situation. All right. So moving forward a little bit. So again, right about a year after 9/11, so October 2002, Congress approves these military operations in Iraq. Well, of course, there was the sort of backing or the sense that there was existing United Nations Security Council resolutions, right? So UNSC. So they kind of built upon those to justify the intervention in Iraq. So some of our main allies, particularly those in Europe, maybe except for the United Kingdom, were sort of alarmed by this sort of more aggressive axis of evil rhetoric, and particularly the potential of preemptive war, this preemptive war doctrine. So a lot of this sort of post 9/11 period sort of had, again, France and Germany have been staunch allies of the United States, but during this period, we kind of saw a breakdown of those relationships, where it was kind of U.S. on one side, and France and Germany and other European states on the others. So it even got kind of to a ridiculous level here. So this is actually from the cafeteria in the main House of Representatives building up in Washington, D.C. So you can see here that even so, instead of calling them French fries, they changed it to freedom fries. So I actually was doing an internship in Washington, D.C. during or a little bit later from this, like 2004 or so, and they still had freedom fries up in the cafeteria, right? So you can see even the kind of silly stuff related to some of this stuff. There was sort of a boycott from a lot of people of French wine or German beer, these kind of things, right? As a kind of like if you're either with us or against us kind of thing. All right. So this is a famous event that happened in early 2003. So Secretary of State Powell gave a major presentation at the United Nations where the administration kind of tried to make the case for war, where they had a lot of photographic footage and other intelligence evidence that they used to try to explain the rationale. Why did the United States think that Iraq was pursuing weapons of mass destruction, and why something needed to be done about it as soon as possible. All right. He has since said that he looked back on this as one of the kind of negative parts of when he was in the administration, because again, a lot of this evidence after the fact kind of came out to be falsified or faulty, and maybe wasn't exactly good enough to to justify going in and intervening in Iraq. All right. So moving ahead here, so we see March 2003. So, like I said, there was this real lack of support from some of our close allies like France and Germany. So, U.S. does get approval from the United Kingdom, Spain, Bulgaria, and some other nations. So, if you remember previously, we had looked at when the United States went into what we call the first Persian Gulf War during the George H.W. Bush administration. That was seen as a textbook example of collective security, where an aggressor state had invaded another country, Iraq invading Kuwait, the United States and others under UN auspices not only contained Iraq in Kuwait, but then rolled them back out of there. So this was a little bit different, for example. This did not sort of have that broad multilateral approval that those operations did. So the U.S. and U.K. go ahead with war plans. So Operation Iraqi Freedom starts on March 19, 2003. That's kind of seen as the sort of beginning of the Iraq War. So just a side thing, we're thinking about foreign policy and this unilateralism versus multilateralism idea. The United States put together what was termed at the time the Coalition of the Willing. Now, this would be an example of what we call ad hoc multilateralism, sort of a group effort designed in response to a specific event or sort of problem, right? So there was some broad approval here, so 26 nations you can see were involved, although again the heavy lifting was really done by the United States. The vast majority of say troops and logistics and equipment involved was American, and sort of Britain kind of in second place there. A lot of these 26 nations, for example, just gave financial support or perhaps medical staff, that kind of thing. Maybe they provided 50 special operations forces, something very very sort of minimal contributions there. All right. So again, ad hoc multilateralism. Okay. All right, so this is a sort of famous thing that happened, right? So then later in 2003, actually a couple different events. You can see where the statue of Saddam Hussein in Baghdad was toppled, and then of course this was a famous event when President Bush flew down on in a fighter jet, flew onto an aircraft carrier to deliver this sort of mission accomplished speech. Now again, a lot of people kind of looked at this as sort of a the Iraq War, of course, went on much longer than this, right? There was the Sunni insurgency, and of course, the war. The last troops did not leave until the Obama administration. So a lot of folks, you can see the huge banner here and all that. That while Saddam was removed and all that, that the mission was by no means accomplished early on. Again, they didn't take, but really, I think 6 weeks or so for the United States to really sort of win that initial part of the war. But again, it's what happened afterwards was the difficult or more challenging part. All right. So again, just a little funny thing, right? So we think about that mission. It maybe in some ways wasn't really accomplished as far as the war being over until later on the Obama administration. So I just found this on the internet that somebody had kind of stuck President Obama's face instead of in front of George Bush's there. All right, so like I said, what were some of these long-term challenges, right? So we talked about a power vacuum in an earlier chapter. So Saddam Hussein had been in power there for decades, right? So not just him, but his Ba'ath Party, B-A-A-T-H is how that's spelled. So we see that Iraq becomes highly unstable, and U.S. officials fear what was called a quagmire. Again, the Vietnam War was often called that. So a situation from which extrication is very difficult. So if you remember from when we looked at the Eisenhower administration, where that president and that administration found themselves involved in a lot of conflicts that they found it very difficult to get out of. So we see the same situation here in Iraq. A lot of folks kind of use the sort of metaphor, the kind of idea like, well, if you broke it, you got to fix it, that kind of thing. All right, so we have a situation of anarchy, again, kind of lawlessness in Iraq. people kind of debating about who should be in charge. So that leads to sustained what we call guerrilla opposition. Again, notice the spelling there. Same pronunciation, guerrilla and guerrilla here. But again, these would sort of be like, rebel fighters and things. So opposition against the United States forces and what we were trying to accomplish there. So there's another vocabulary word I wanted you to be aware of called insurgency. So this is what we refer to as what happened, or an example of this is what happened after the initial invasion of Iraq, right? So this is an insurrection against an existing government, usually one's own, by a group not recognized as having the status of a belligerent, right? So again, it's not like it's some kind of foreign group that's trying to get power here. So if you remember in Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, right? Again, so Sunni is by far the largest, or makes up the vast majority of Muslims in the world. About 85% of all Muslims are Sunni. But in Iraq, you have an actual unusual situation where the majority of the population is Shia or Shiite. So, a lot of folks say, well, one thing they didn't think about as much as probably they should have is that what was going to happen when you toppled a Sunni dictator, right, whose group had been a demographic minority but still was in charge. Well, of course, what was going to happen after that? The majority Shia wanted to be in power, and of course, there was going to be some issues between those two major sects of Islam within Iraq. So what we see happen is an insurgency by the Sunni in Iraq, again against U.S. and other coalition forces. All right. So there was also the sense that you can see that the preconceptions did not meet reality. So one of the high level generals at that time advised Congress and administration that several 100,000 troops were going to be needed for post-war duties. Again, he said, Iraq is a major country. If we kind of go in there and remove Saddam Hussein, go through this sort of de-Baathification project that you see here, disband the army and police force, all those kind of things, that it's going to need a sustained, huge presence, huge involvement by the United States. Although, again, this was rejected at that time. So, of course, things don't quite go the way they had planned. So we also think about this sort of shifting rationales for war, right? So if the war was predicated or justified with the main idea that Saddam Hussein was attempting to develop and proliferate weapons of mass destruction, again, nuclear, biological, whatever it was going to be, well, if that rationale was taken away, and we also did not, it was kind of realized after a while that there was no connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, then sort of like, well, what are we doing there? So it sort of shifted from WMD, anti-terrorism, counterterrorism efforts, because again, we thought Saddam was connected to Al-Qaeda. So it sort of shifts to more of this, well, Saddam was a bad guy, they're better off without him. We're going to bring democracy to the Middle East. We want to promote freedom, all these type of things. So then moving up a little bit, there was another major international incident in the spring of 2004. There was a prison there in Iraq called Abu Ghraib. So you might remember there was on say for example on TV and all over the media, there were these photos of some of the American the guards, American military guards that had the prisoners there, like kind of stripped naked, in a kind of a pyramid with one another and that type of thing. So those images sort of flamed, anti-American sentiment around the world. And often a lot of Al-Qaeda was able to sort of use that in their propaganda war against the United States, right? Oh, look what the United States is doing to Muslims there in Iraq. So it did not reflect well on the United States, and actually kind of hurt our, hurt U.S. objectives in the region. All right. So there's another. So we just talked about this sort of tension between the Shia and the Sunnis. So that's an example of what we call sectarian violence. So we said these are different sects, right? So again, this would be more related to Islam, but it could be really with any group where there's a challenge between different, or tension or violence between different sects of one particular ideology or religion. So we'll go ahead and end here, and then we'll